Picture a river, not a river of water, a river of everything else. Horse manure still steaming in the November cold, slaughterhouse blood running in thin red channels between the cobblestones, the runoff from tanneries where animal hides are soaked in dog feces and bark until they become leather, ash from 1,000 coal fires dumped into the gutters at dawn, rotting cabbage leaves from the market stalls, dead cats, the contents of chamber pots thrown from upper windows because the privy in the yard is full again and the night soil men haven't come in 3 days. Broken glass from a bottle someone smashed outside the gin shop last night. A horseshoe nail, bent and rusting, point up in the muck. A patch of something greenish and chemical that nobody can identify and nobody wants to. That's a London street in 1852, on a good day. Now, take off your shoes. Take off your stockings too. Press the bare soles of your feet, soft, clean, alive, down into that river. Feel it, the cold, the wet, the particular give of things you cannot see but can feel shifting under your weight, the sharp edge of something that isn't quite rock. The slick patch that your foot slides across before you catch yourself, heart lurching. Now walk 3 miles to work, because work starts at 6 and it's 5:15 and there's no other way to get there. Now do it every day. That's what we're talking about tonight. Not some abstract historical curiosity, not a footnote about Victorian poverty. We're talking about the actual, specific, terrifying physics of what happened when the bare human foot met the 19th century city, what was in the street, why it mattered, what it did to the people who had no choice but to walk through it. We're going back to London, not the London of gaslit drawing rooms and Dickens reading from his latest novel to a packed hall and ladies in crinolines attending exhibitions. We're going to the other London, the one underneath all that, the one that built the first one. This is a city of 2.5 million people crammed into streets designed for maybe a quarter that. The largest city on earth in 1852, the richest empire in human history, the centre of the world, and the streets are full of horse dung to the depth of a man's ankle. We're not tourists, we're living it. One day, one body, one pair of bare feet navigating the most dangerous surface in the world. I make these history stories to help people sleep, which I realise is an odd thing to try to do while describing what Victorian London smelled like in July. Either it works and you're already drifting off, or you're one of those people who lies in bed absolutely riveted by the idea of 19th century street filth. In which case, same honestly, and either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Thomas Reardon. You're 14 years old, and you've been in London for 11 months and 9 days. You know the exact number because you've been counting, the way you count everything now. Coins, steps, hours until the shift ends. Because when everything around you is chaos, numbers feel like something solid to hold on to. You came from Skibbereen in County Cork, which you don't need to know much about except that by 1851, half the people there were either dead or gone. Your mother's sister had a room in Bermondsey, south of the river, and she'd written twice saying London was work if you were willing, and you were willing, because the alternative was staying where you were, and the alternative was not good. You arrived on a November morning on a coal barge that smelled exactly as bad as you think it did, carrying everything you owned in a bundle wrapped in a piece of oilskin, 2 shirts, a coat your father left you, a pair of trousers, and the shoes. The shoes mattered. They were heavy leather brogans, made by a cobbler in the village, resoled twice. They weren't pretty, they weren't comfortable exactly, but they were solid, and they covered your feet, and in the hierarchy of things you owned, they were near the top. The shoes are gone now. You know when, you don't know who. 3 weeks ago, coming home from the match factory where you work in Bermondsey, you stopped at the lodging house on Tanner Street, where you pay 3p a night for a place on a wooden shelf in a room with 7 other people. You were exhausted. The kind of exhausted where your hands shake when you try to unlace things. You put the shoes under the shelf, right under your feet where you could feel them, and you fell asleep. When you woke up, the man who'd been sleeping next to you was gone. The shoes were gone. You lay there for a moment staring at the wall, because sometimes if you give bad news a moment, it turns out to not be true. Sometimes you misremember, not this time. The man had grey hair and a missing finger on his left hand and a cough like something loose inside a drum, and now he and your shoes were somewhere in London. And London had 2.5 million people, and you had no idea where to start looking. So you didn't look. You went to work in your bare feet. And here is where things get complicated. Because you've been doing that for 3 weeks now, and nothing bad has happened yet, and you've started to think maybe it's fine. Maybe the shoes were making you soft. The sole of your foot has hardened. It's not nothing walking barefoot in November on London cobblestones, but it's survivable. You're surviving. This morning, though, this morning something is different. You wake before the church bells. The lodging house shelf is hard under your hip, and the room smells of 7 people's breath, and the unwashed wool of 7 people's coats, and the tallow candle someone burned down to the socket last night. The ceiling above you is cracked. There's a water stain that spreads from the corner like a brown map of somewhere you've never been. You've stared at it enough nights that you've given it a name in your head. Kerry. It looks like Kerry. You sit up slowly. Your feet come off the shelf and find the floor before your eyes properly open. The floor is wooden and gritty with dirt tracked in from the street. The cold hits the soles of your feet like water, instant and biting, and you curl your toes against it automatically. 3 weeks of this and your feet know what to expect. They brace. The man in the bunk opposite is still snoring. Red-faced man works at the leather dressers, always smells of something chemical and wrong. You don't know his name and don't want to. In lodging houses, not knowing names is a form of protection. The less you know, the less you owe. You dress quickly. The shirt, still damp from yesterday's sweat. The trousers, thick moleskin that is starting to go at the knees. The coat, which is your father's coat, which is the only piece of clothing you will not lose, will not sell, will not let anyone take from you. It's too big. It always was too big. Your father was a larger man than you are now, and maybe you'll grow into it. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. You wear it, and it keeps the cold off, and it smells faintly of something that was home once. No shoes. You pull on your stockings at least. They're thin wool, more holes than wool at this point, but there's something between your skin and the street. A kind of fiction, a pretense of protection. You don't have time to think about it. The match factory opens at 6 and it's a 20-minute walk, and you need to eat something first. Downstairs, the lodging house keeper has a pot of something on the fire. Porridge, technically. In practice, it's hot and pale and mostly water with some oatmeal in it. And you eat it standing up, bowl in both hands, leaning against the doorframe to the street. The street outside is already moving. This needs a moment. Because before you step outside, you need to understand what's out there. Not in the abstract way you understand it from standing on the step, in the actual forensic scientific way. What is literally, physically, on the ground of a London street in 1852 at 5:30 on a November morning. First, horse dung. And when I say horse dung, I need you to understand the scale of this. There are roughly 50,000 horses in London in 1852, working horses, cart horses, carriage horses, omnibus horses, private horses, the massive draft animals pulling brewery wagons that weigh more than houses. 50,000 horses. Each horse produces on average 35 pounds of manure per day. That's 35 pounds of manure per horse per day. 50,000 horses. You do that math. I'll wait. 1.75 million pounds of horse manure deposited on the streets of London every single day. Some of it gets cleared. There are street cleaners who push it into heaps at the corners. There are dung collectors who load it into carts and sell it to the market gardens north of the city. There is an entire economy based on the removal of horse dung from London streets, because if you didn't remove it, the streets would be impassable within a week. But they can't keep up. Nobody can keep up with 1.75 million pounds a day. Not with the technology of 1852, not with brooms and handcarts and men earning sixpence a shift. So most of it stays. It gets walked through, rained on, mixed with the rest of what's on the street until it becomes part of the general matter underfoot, the street layer, the dark paste that coats the cobblestones and fills the gaps between them and squeezes up around your feet when you step in it. In dry weather it pulverizes into dust and blows into your face. In wet weather it becomes something else, something darker and deeper and with a smell that hits you from half a street away. Second, urine. Same horses, different product. Third, the slaughterhouses. Bermondsey is not a refined neighbourhood. It never pretended to be. There are leather dressers here, the tanneries that process animal hides. And there are glue factories, and there are slaughterhouses serving the London meat trade. These places have been here for generations, clustered in the narrow streets south of the river because nobody with choices wanted to live next to them. The slaughterhouses kill cattle and pigs and sheep. The blood has to go somewhere. The offal has to go somewhere. The answer in 1852 is essentially the street. There are drains, they're inadequate. After a slaughter morning, the gutters run with something pink and thinning in the rain, and it mixes with the other things in the gutters, and by the time it reaches the river, it is simply part of London. Fourth, ash. Every house burns coal. Every shop, every factory, every lodging house, every public house burns coal. The ash has to be disposed of, and the disposal method for most of the city is dumping it into the street or the nearest gutter, or a pile that will eventually be collected by the dustmen and taken to the dust yards east of the city. Coal ash is fine and grey and coats everything. It's in the air, in the water, in the walls of the buildings, in your lungs, and in the street under your feet. It mixes with the dung and the blood and the mud and the rain until the whole ground is a kind of dark porridge, and walking through it barefoot means walking through a mixture of things that your body was not designed to encounter. Fifth, glass. Bottles break, windows break, lantern glass breaks. The fragments don't disappear. They sink into the general matter of the street and wait, invisible in the muck, patient, specific about what they'll do when a soft sole finds them. Sixth, nails, horseshoe nails, barrel nails, the small iron tacks that hold together wooden boxes. They come loose, they end up in the street. They rust, which makes them softer but also gives them edges that tear rather than cut clean. A nail in the foot in 1852 is not the same as a nail in the foot now. In 1852 you do not go to the chemist for a tetanus shot. The germ theory of disease is not yet accepted by most of London's medical establishment. They know that wounds fester. They know that festering leads to fever, and fever leads to death. But the mechanism, the invisible organisms, the bacterial infection of soft tissue, that understanding is only just beginning in laboratories and lecture halls, and it hasn't reached Tanner Street yet. A nail in the foot in 1852, if you're unlucky, is the beginning of something much worse than a nail in the foot. Seventh, everything else. The ash from lime kilns, the chemical runoff from the tanneries, chromic acid, bark tannin, the residue of processes too varied and too nasty to detail. The sawdust from the timber yards that blooms into the street every morning. The fish scales and bones from the costermongers' carts, the rotten vegetables, the broken crockery, a dead cat 3 days dead that nobody has collected. All of it underfoot, in the dark, in the November cold, before sunrise. This is what you step onto when you walk out the door. You step onto it. The first thing is the cold. It hits the sole of your foot with the same mechanical fact as a slap. Not painful exactly, just absolute. The cobblestones are slicked with frost, and your thin stockings are already soaked through before you've taken 3 steps. Your toes curl instinctively and then release, because curling them doesn't help. It just makes your gait wrong and your balance worse. You've learned to walk differently. That's the thing nobody tells you about going barefoot in a city. It changes how you walk. You can't stride. You have to look at the ground, reading it the way a waterman reads the current, looking for the patches of light-coloured cobblestone that mean dry and solid, versus the darker patches that mean wet and uncertain. You learn to feel with the ball of your foot before committing your weight. You learn to step around the sharper corners of the stones and onto the flatter centres. You become, in a small and specific way, a specialist. The Tanner Street morning crowd is already thick. Dock workers heading south toward the wharves at Rotherhithe. Factory hands shuffling north toward the leather dressers. Women with market baskets making for the stalls before the best produce goes. A cart horse standing passive while its driver argues with someone about the position of the cart. You thread through them, head down, coat pulled tight, watching the ground. The match factory is 20 minutes northeast. You've made this walk enough times that your body knows it without thinking. Turn left at the end of Tanner Street, right at the tannery gates where the smell is worst, across the intersection at the main road where the omnibus route runs, then down toward the factory gate where the foreman stands at 6 on the dot and closes the gate at 3 past and docks your wages if you're on the wrong side of it. The walk is unremarkable until it isn't. You're crossing the main road. The cobblestones here are wider, older, worn smooth by decades of wheels. The gaps between them are filled with the accumulated matter of those decades. You're reading the ground the way you've learned to. You're watching. And then something happens that has nothing to do with watching. A cart comes around the corner fast. The carter shouts. You step back to get out of the way. Your foot comes down not on the cobblestone you'd chosen, but on the edge of the one next to it, at an angle, and your weight rolls outward, and there's a sound that your mind registers before your body does. Not the cut. You don't feel the cut at first. What you feel is the wrong texture, the specific wrong texture of something small and sharp and metallic, pressing through your stocking and into the sole of your foot with a coldness that is different from the cold of the street. Then you feel it. Not pain yet, not properly. Pain takes a moment to arrive. What arrives first is a kind of hot electricity that travels from the ball of your foot up the back of your leg to the base of your spine and says, very clearly, pay attention, you stop. The cart has already gone. The carter isn't looking back. You lift your foot. In the grey November light, through the torn wool of your stocking, you can see a small dark line on the pale skin of your sole. Not deep, not bleeding badly, just a cut the width of a nail head, maybe an inch long, pressed into the arch where the skin is thinner. You put your foot back down, you keep walking. Because what else do you do? You've got 17 minutes to reach the factory gate. The match factory is a long, low building that smells of phosphorus even before you reach the gate. It's not a bad smell exactly. It's sharp and chemical and yellow somehow, the way a smell can have a colour. Phosphorus. It coats the inside of your nose within the first 10 minutes of your shift and you stop noticing it, which your body will decide later was the wrong response. The gate opens at 6. 63 workers push through it. You're number 40-something, which means a spot at a middle bench in the main hall, which is where you prefer to be. Not near the door. Too cold in winter, the draughts come under the gap and settle around your ankles. Not at the back near the dipping vats. Too much phosphorus there, and the fumes from the vats make your eyes water by 8 o'clock. Middle bench, third seat from the left. This is your territory. The work is simple. You take a wooden splint, they come in a bundle of 200, and dip one end into the prepared match paste. Then lay it in a frame to dry. The paste is white phosphorus mixed with other compounds. It's the phosphorus that makes the match head. It's the phosphorus that makes you sick. Not immediately, not today or this week or this month, but the phosphorus vapour, breathed day after day in an enclosed space, does something specific and horrible to the human jaw. The bone becomes infected, starts to glow faintly green at night, starts to die from the inside out. They call it phossy jaw. The official name is phosphorus necrosis of the jaw. The medical name doesn't make it better. You know this. Everyone at the factory knows this. The foreman has 2 fingers and no right to lecture anyone about risk. The woman who works 2 seats down from you, Mary Fagan, has a swelling under her left ear that she doesn't talk about, and neither does anyone else. This is the work available. You do the work. For 11 hours you dip and lay and dip and lay, and the frames fill up with match heads drying in neat rows, and the stack of finished frames grows behind the foreman's bench, and the phosphorus vapour hangs in the air like something visible just at the edge of vision. Your foot hurts. It started hurting properly about an hour into the shift. The cut had time to warm up, time to remember what happened to it. And now it's making itself known in a way that is hard to ignore. A throbbing, specific and rhythmic, timed to your heartbeat, which means your heart is sending blood to it, and your blood is in contact with whatever was on that nail. You don't think about this too carefully. You dip and lay. The woman next to you, a wide-shouldered woman from Worcestershire named Agatha, who has been here 3 years and knows everything about the factory and nothing about her own face, notices you shifting on the stool. Foot, she says. Not a question exactly, more like a diagnosis. Cut it this morning. She looks at your feet. Bare now. The stockings peeled off at the door because the foreman doesn't want the floors tracked with street filth, which is a strange concern given what's in the air, and makes a sound that is not quite a sound, more like a considered silence. Where? The arch. Something in the road. She goes back to her work. Then, without looking up, soak it tonight. If it goes red past the ankle, get to the infirmary. She says it the way you'd tell someone the omnibus goes from London Bridge. Practical information delivered without drama. Red past the ankle, infirmary. Simple. You file this away and keep working. 11 hours later, you're standing at the factory gate in the last of the November light, which is to say, the dark. It's dark by 4 in London in November, and it's past 6 now, and the streets outside the factory are lit by gas lamps that pool yellow light onto the wet cobblestones. The light makes the street look almost beautiful. The wet cobblestones reflect the gas flame back at you, and the vapour from the horse traffic rises in the cold air, and the people streaming out of the factory gate with you have their collars up and their heads down, and from here, from this angle, in this light, it could almost be a painting of industry and night, and the human machine running on. Then your foot finds a loose cobblestone edge, and the pain arrives again, and you stop seeing it as a painting. You make yourself walk normally, or what passes for normally, which is carefully and slowly and with your weight shifted slightly to the outside of your right foot to spare the arch. 20 minutes back to Tanner Street. 3p for your shelf, 6p for your supper at the eating house 3 doors down, 2p for tomorrow's breakfast. You count it as you walk, not because you don't know, but because the counting settles you. Numbers in order, things you can control. The city moves around you. Here is something they don't tell you about injuries to the feet. The foot is extraordinary engineering. The human foot has 26 bones, 33 joints, and more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. It evolved to do exactly this kind of work, to carry you across varied, uneven ground, to respond to what's underfoot and adapt and balance. But it evolved for certain things to be underfoot: soil, grass, rock, sand, natural surfaces, clean surfaces, in the sense that they don't contain specific organisms that your body has no experience fighting. London street matter is not that. London street matter. In 1852, before Louis Pasteur's germ theory has fully arrived in the English medical mainstream, before Joseph Lister has published his work on antiseptic surgery, before anyone in the city's medical establishment has fully accepted that invisible organisms cause infection, London street matter is essentially a solution of every kind of pathogen your body can encounter. Horse manure contains Clostridium tetani. This is the bacterium that causes tetanus. It produces a toxin that interferes with the nervous system in a way that causes muscles to contract and lock. The jaw locks first, hence the old name, lockjaw. Then the back arches, then the muscles of the chest and throat. You cannot swallow. Eventually you cannot breathe. Tetanus in 1852 is almost always fatal. The street also contains Clostridium perfringens. This one causes gas gangrene, which is exactly what it sounds like. The bacteria infect soft tissue, usually in wounds, and as they metabolize, they produce gas. The tissue swells and the skin becomes thin, and you can feel it crackling under your fingers like paper. The infected area turns black. The smell is distinctive and terrible. The treatment is amputation if you catch it early enough, which you often don't. These are just the most dramatic ones. There's also Streptococcus and Staphylococcus, bacteria that cause the kind of wound infection that makes a small cut grow hot and red and swollen until the swelling spreads up the limb and the fever starts. Erysipelas, cellulitis, blood poisoning, which in 1852 is called septicemia when anyone calls it anything, and is treated mainly with hope and prayer. You walked barefoot through a street that contains all of these things. You stepped on a nail or a shard of something, and that something was covered in street matter. That street matter is now inside the cut on the arch of your foot. This is not a metaphor. This is not a dramatic device. This is what happened to thousands of people in London in 1852 every week, in a city where shoes were expensive and poverty was not. Tonight, in the lodging house on Tanner Street, you pull off your stocking and look at your foot. By the light of the tallow candle, the cut is a thin line, maybe an inch across the arch. The edges have already started to close a little. It's not bleeding anymore. There's dried blood darkened to black in the fabric of the stocking. Around the cut, the skin is slightly pink. Just slightly. Just more than it was this morning. You remember what Agatha said. Red past the ankle, infirmary. You're not there yet. You're nowhere close. It's a little pink. People get little pink all the time. You wrap the foot in a strip of cloth torn from an old shirt, the cleanest thing you have, and you lie down on your shelf. The man in the bunk opposite is coughing his loose drum cough. Somewhere outside, a woman is arguing with someone in the street. You hear her voice rising, and then a door slamming, and then silence. The tallow candle gutters. You sleep. 3 days later, you can smell your own foot. This is not nothing. You're a teenage boy in a Victorian lodging house. You've grown accustomed to smell. The smell of the room, the smell of your clothes, the smell of the match factory that has moved into your hair and refuses to leave. But this is different. This is a specific smell that comes from the cloth wrapped around your foot when you unwrap it in the morning, and it's the kind of smell that activates something primitive at the base of your brain. Not disgust exactly, more like alarm. The cut is no longer just a cut. The edges are no longer trying to close. They're open, and the skin around them is red, and the red extends outward from the cut in a rough circle about the size of your palm, and the skin in that circle is warm. You press it gently with one finger, and the warmth presses back like something alive in there, something with its own heat running just below the surface. You put your stocking on, you go to work. This is what happens. This is what happened to thousands of people in this city in this year. Not dramatic ignorance, not denial exactly, just the arithmetic of poverty. If you don't go to work, you don't eat. If you don't eat, you can't pay your threepence for the shelf. If you can't pay for the shelf, you sleep on the street, and the cold takes you faster than infection. So you go to work. You manage the pain. You keep moving. The factory floor is hard under your foot, and the throbbing is worse by mid-morning. You shift your weight. You find a position that works, and you stay in it until you have to move, and then you find another position. Agatha watches you without watching you. You know this because at one point she sets down her bundle of splints and turns to look at you directly, which is unusual for Agatha. How's the foot? Fine. She looks at you the way older women look at teenagers who say fine. The look that says, I invented fine. I know what fine actually sounds like. Show me. I'm working. I've been here 3 years, she says. I've seen 3 people lose feet to infections that started smaller than yours looks right now. Show me. So you show her. You peel off the stocking in the relative privacy behind the drying frames, and she crouches down and looks without touching, because she's been at this factory long enough to know about the spread of things. The red circle has grown overnight. It's now the size of 2 hands laid flat, and at its centre, at the cut itself, there's a darker spot. Not black, not yet, but tending in that direction. Agatha stands up. You need to go to Guy's, she says. Guy's is Guy's hospital. It's across the river. It's a 10-minute walk from the factory. I'll go tonight after. Not tonight. Her voice has changed. The practical information voice is gone. Something more insistent has replaced it. Now. You go now. You tell them how long it's been. You let them look at it properly. They have a surgery gate that opens at 8 for non-paying cases. I'll lose the day's wages. She looks at you. Then she does something unexpected. She reaches into the pocket of her apron and pulls out 4 pennies and puts them in your hand. For the bridge toll, she says. Go. You want to argue. You want to say you're fine again, that it's just a cut, that you've had worse. But there's something in Agatha's face that stops you. 3 years in this factory. 3 people she watched lose feet. She knows what she's looking at. You go. It's the first time you've left the factory before noon. The streets look different in the morning light. Not better or worse. Different. The same streets. Different lighting. Different crowd. The people moving through them at 9 in the morning are not the shift workers and factory hands. The shift is in. The 9 o'clock street belongs to someone else. Delivery men, costermongers arranging their carts for the day, servants hurrying on errands for households in the nicer streets behind, a group of children sitting on a step who look up at you as you pass. The children are barefoot. That's the thing you notice. Half the children are barefoot. Small ones, 5 or 6 years old, feet already thick-soled from months or years of this. They don't look distressed by it. They've never known anything else. A girl, maybe 7, is sitting on the lower step with her feet tucked under her, and she's eating something out of a paper, a bit of bread, something on it. And she watches you walk past with a flat, observational look that belongs on a much older face. You've been in London 11 months and 9 days. You've been counting. When you arrived, you thought you understood poverty. In Cork, in Skibbereen, you understood what it meant to not have enough, to go without. London has expanded your understanding considerably. In Cork, the poverty was hungry and cold, but it was countryside poverty, and countryside poverty has a different quality. In the country, you can sometimes find food. In the country, the air is, well, the air is air. In London, poverty is compressed. It's layered. It's in the walls of the buildings, in the colour of the river, in the faces of the people on this step. And it's in the street underfoot. Because here's what you've started to understand. Walking through this city for 11 months, the street is different in different parts of London. You've been all over. You've run errands to the city, to Southwark, to the market at Cheapside, to a warehouse in Wapping once, where you spent an afternoon loading crates alongside men who hadn't slept in 2 days. In Mayfair, they clean the streets, not sometimes, not after market days. They clean them every morning. Men with brooms and water carts making a circuit of the squares and the wide pavements. The streets of Mayfair are never exactly clean. No London street in 1852 is clean, but they are approximately manageable. The streets of Bermondsey are not cleaned, not in any serious way. The dung collectors come occasionally. The crossing sweepers maintain small fiefdoms at the main intersections, but the accumulated matter of the street, the dung and the blood and the ash and the glass, it builds up. It gets walked into layers. It becomes the street. And the children on the step have never lived anywhere that was different. The girl with the bread catches you staring. She stares back, completely unafraid, chewing. You walk on. At the main road crossing, where Tanner Street meets the bigger artery heading toward the bridge, there's a boy with a broom. He's maybe 12, small for 12. wearing a coat 3 sizes too large and a hat jammed down over his ears. He's working the crossing, sweeping a path through the dung and filth for the people crossing the road, keeping a cleanish lane of cobblestone for feet and boots and skirts. This is a job, an actual job. Crossing sweepers have territories. They establish them by being there first every morning, and they defend them by simply being there day after day until the crossing is theirs. The people who use the crossing, if they're decent, throw a penny to the sweeper now and then, sometimes more, sometimes nothing. It's essentially begging with a prop. The prop matters. The broom means you're doing something. You're a labourer, not a beggar. The distinction is important to people who cross the street and need to negotiate their conscience. The boy sees you coming. He sees the way you're walking. He looks at your feet, the way people in this part of London have learned to look at feet, the way a sailor looks at the sky. Want the clean path? He asks. You look at the crossing. He's done a reasonable job. There's a strip maybe 3 feet wide that has been swept down to something closer to cobblestone. Not clean, but less. How much? Penny. I haven't got... You stop. You have 4 pennies in your hand from Agatha. Fine. You walk across the clean path. Your foot still finds ways to hurt. The cobblestones are cold through the stocking and the cloth wrapping, but the crossing sweeper's path means you're not adding new things to the wound, which is something. On the other side, you look back. The boy has already started sweeping again, readying the path for the next pedestrian, the broom dragging through the street matter with the sound like very slow tearing. You've been on this road 11 months and you don't think you've ever really looked at him before. He's just part of the street, the way the gas lamps are part of the street, and the costermongers are part of the street, and the grey sky pressing down on the rooftops is part of the street. Now you look. He sweeps. His hands are red with cold around the broom handle. His shoes, he has shoes, you notice, old and wrong-shaped but present, are so caked with the matter of the street that you can't tell what colour they were originally. His face is thin and specific, the thin, specific face that means not enough food for long enough that it's changed the structure. He's probably been sweeping this crossing for a year or more. This patch of street, this 3-foot wide lane of slightly less filth, is his livelihood. He probably knows every cobblestone. He probably knows which ones are loose and which ones rock under the weight of a cartwheel and which ones, come spring, will pop up entirely when the frost heaves the ground. This crossing is his city, his 3-foot wide London. You keep walking toward the bridge. London Bridge is... well, London Bridge in 1852 is not the original London Bridge, the medieval one with the houses and the heads on the gate. That bridge was demolished in the 1830s, and what replaced it is this one, a 5-arch stone bridge, opened in 1831, wide enough for 2 carriages to pass each other, functional, solid, replacing something ancient with something practical. You cross it most mornings. Today you cross it and look at the river. The Thames in November is grey, green and opaque. The tide is going out and the mud flats on the south bank are exposed and dark and already populated. The mudlarks are out. Mudlarks are another thing you didn't know existed before London. They work the exposed riverbank at low tide, searching through the mud for anything saleable. Nails pulled from rotting timber, coal fallen from the coal barges, rope ends, bones, occasionally a coin. The coins are rare enough to constitute a good day. They're mostly children. They wade in the mud. The Thames mud in 1852 is extraordinary in its composition. The river is the city's sewer. Every drain, every cesspit overflow, every slaughterhouse outflow, every tannery drain finds its way to the Thames. The mud is thick with it. It smells, on warm days, like something beyond description. The children wade in it to their knees, to their waists on the steep banks, barefoot, or if not barefoot, then in shoes so wrecked that barefoot would be equivalent. They push their hands into the mud and feel for things, the way you might feel for a coin dropped in sand, except the sand is a mixture of raw sewage and industrial runoff. The mortality rate among mudlarks is not well recorded in the official statistics of 1852, because mudlarks are not the kind of people whose deaths end up in careful records. They die of the things you'd expect: cholera from the river mud that enters through cuts in their hands and feet, typhoid from the water, hypothermia in winter from the combination of wet and cold, infections from the wounds that the mud gives them. They're always there. Every low tide the mudflats fill with their thin figures moving slowly through the dark mud. From the bridge, they look almost peaceful, like they're searching for something they love. You cross to the north side and turn east toward Guy's Hospital. Guy's Hospital is a substantial stone building set back from the main road, with iron gates and a courtyard and an air of institutional seriousness that communicates, even from the street, that this is a place where things happen that require institutional seriousness. It was founded in 1721 by a bookseller named Thomas Guy, who made a fortune in the South Sea Company and used some of it to build a hospital for the incurable poor, which is as specific a charitable mission as you'll find. Incurable poor. That was the original brief. By 1852 it has expanded significantly, but the clientele remains essentially the poor. The paying patients go to private physicians or to the voluntary hospitals with the nicer entrance halls. The non-paying patients, the workers, the servants, the factory hands, the people who live on Tanner Street, come to Guy's through the surgery gate on the south side, which opens at 8 and processes whatever presents itself. You present yourself. The surgery gate is a wooden door set into the hospital wall, already open when you arrive. A man sits at a small table just inside with a ledger and the defeated expression of someone who has been recording human misery in a ledger for years and has developed a professional relationship with it. Name: Thomas Reardon. Parish: Bermondsey, sir, St. Mary Magdalene. He writes this down. Complaint: foot, a cut, sir, 3 days ago. It's gone. It's looking wrong. He doesn't look up from the ledger. Bench on the left. A dresser will be with you. The bench on the left is in a corridor that smells of carbolic soap, and underneath the soap, something you recognise from the street. The sweet specific smell of wound infection. You're not the first person here today with a problem of this nature. There are 5 other people on the bench. A man with his arm in a sling who keeps his eyes fixed on the floor. An older woman with one shoe off and one on, rocking slightly. 2 children with a mother who looks like she hasn't slept in several days. You sit. You wait. The dresser who comes for you is a young man, 22 or 23, in a grey coat that was once white. His hands are clean with the specific clean of someone who washes them many times a day. He looks at your face first, then at your foot, then at your face again. How long? 3 days. Show me. You unwrap the cloth. He looks without expression at the red circle, at the darker centre, at the cut that is still open and oozing slightly. He puts his fingers on the skin at the edge of the red and presses gently, 3 times, moving outward. Each press makes you hiss through your teeth. Tender, he says, not a question. Yes. The redness. When you woke this morning, was it as far as it is now? Or has it spread today, you think? You've been looking at it every morning, trying not to think about what you're seeing. Has it spread today? You can't say exactly. It might have. A little. I think it spread a little. He straightens up. He has the expression of someone doing arithmetic. You'll need to see the surgeon. Wait here. He goes. You sit on the bench in the corridor and look at the other people waiting. The man with the sling, the woman with one shoe, the children who have fallen asleep against their mother's side. The hospital sounds, a door closing somewhere with a specific resonance that says institutional. The murmur of voices from beyond another door, a groan from somewhere deep in the building quickly stifled. You think about Agatha's 4 pennies. You think about the day's wages you're losing. You think about the crossing sweeper and his 3-foot-wide London. Then you think about what she said, read past the ankle, and you look at your ankle, where the redness ends. Just at the ankle, just touching the edge of it. And you think about what past the ankle means, and you sit very still. The surgeon is a compact man in his mid-40s with short grey hair and the kind of hands that have cut things and repaired things and been washed in carbolic soaps so many times that the knuckles have a roughness to them like old stone. His name is Mr. Pemberton, not Doctor. Surgeons in England are Mr. A tradition going back to the days when surgeons were barber surgeons and had a lower social status than physicians. He looks at the foot with a closeness that is a different thing from the dresser's look. He uses a small lens, holding it close to the cut. He presses the surrounding area with a systematic efficiency that is not gentle, but is not brutal. You're a factory hand? Yes, sir, match factory. Something shifts in his expression at match factory, but he doesn't say anything about it. How did you cut it? Something in the road. I was crossing when a cart came. You were barefoot. Yes, sir. He sets the lens down. He looks at you with the look of a man who has seen this exact presentation many times in this exact institution. Young, poor, barefoot. 3 days of infection. It hasn't gone past the ankle yet, he says. It sounds like slightly good news. The way he says it also sounds like the good news has a time limit. What happens if it goes past the ankle? We're discussing something more serious, he says. Red streaks running up the leg. Fever. Systemic involvement. He pauses. At that stage, the options become limited. He doesn't say amputation. He doesn't need to. You know what limited options means in a hospital corridor in 1852. You know because you've heard about it. You've heard about the things that happen to people in hospitals in this era, and the knowledge you have, drawn from scraps of overheard conversation and second-hand accounts, is that hospitals in 1852 are places where people go to survive or not, and the not is more common than you'd prefer. The surgeon picks up the lens again. I'm going to clean the wound, he says, and dress it properly. You'll need to stay off it today if possible. Come back in 2 days. If it's spreading, come back sooner. I can't stay off it, sir. I've work. He looks at you with the same look Agatha gave you when you said fine. The match factory. Yes, sir. He's quiet for a moment. Then, phosphorus work. Yes, sir. He looks at the side of your jaw, at the glands there. He's doing the arithmetic a surgeon does about a 14-year-old boy in a match factory, and you can see the arithmetic happening in his face, and you look away from it because you'd rather not know the result of it right now. Come back in 2 days, he says again. Sooner if it spreads. He cleans the wound with carbolic solution. It burns in a way that is almost satisfying. The kind of burn that feels like something being addressed. He dresses it with lint soaked in the same solution and wraps it with clean bandage. Real bandage, not a strip of old shirt. When he's done, he holds your foot in both hands for a moment, just holding it, the way you'd hold something fragile to assess its weight. How long have you been without shoes? 3 weeks. He sets your foot down. He writes something in the case notes. He hands the notes to the dresser without showing them to you. 2 days, he says. You sit for a while on the bench in the corridor before you leave. Not because you need to, just because it's warm and the bench is solid, and for a moment you don't want to go back out through the gate into the November street. From here, through a high window at the end of the corridor, you can see a piece of sky, grey, the absolute London grey that has no gradation in it, just grey from horizon to horizon, and below the sky the top floor of a warehouse on the south bank and the grey-green top edge of the river. You've been trying to keep track of the city. You've been making a kind of mental map, adding to it each time you go somewhere new. You know Bermondsey now, know it well enough that you walk it without thinking. You know the route to the factory and the route to the market and the route to the bridge. You don't know this part very well. The North Bank, the area around Guy's, Borough it's called. South of the river still, technically, though it feels different from Bermondsey. The streets are a little wider here. The buildings more substantial. There are coffee houses and a coaching inn you can see from the hospital gate. London's geography is a strange thing. You've been here 11 months and you've covered maybe 1/10 of it. The city is enormous and most of it is simply there, unknown, happening without you. Every Londoner has this experience, the knowledge that the city is vastly bigger than your version of it, that on every street you haven't been down, there are people living their full, complicated lives, people who are the main characters of a story you'll never know about. You think about this sometimes when the counting in your head gets too tight, when the numbers, pennies, splints, hours, start to feel like walls. There's a whole city out there. There are streets you haven't seen. The older woman with one shoe is still sitting on the bench across from you. She's been there since you arrived. She hasn't moved. She's looking at the floor with the focused look of someone not looking at anything. You don't know what's wrong with her. You don't ask. In lodging houses and hospital corridors, you learn the same lesson about asking questions. But you look at her, and you look at your bandaged foot, and you look at the piece of grey sky through the high window, and something settles in your chest. Not comfort, more like clarity. You're alive. The cut is not past the ankle. The surgeon cleaned it and dressed it and said 2 days, which means he expects there will be something to check in 2 days. You're going back to the factory tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. You're going to dip and lay for 11 hours a day and breathe phosphorus vapour and lose the light before your shift ends. You're going to walk on your bare feet and watch the ground and try to be more careful about where your weight goes. You're going to get shoes, eventually. You've been telling yourself this. It's taking longer than you thought. Everything in London takes longer than you thought. But right now, on this bench, in this corridor, you're warm. Your foot is properly dressed for the first time in 3 days. Agatha gave you 4 pennies, and there are still 2 left. The woman across from you looks up suddenly and meets your eyes. First time, she says. Here? Yes. She nods, looks back at the floor, then, the surgeon's good. Pemberton doesn't mess about. He seemed it. I've been here 4 times now. She says this without embarrassment. Different things each time. The city's generous with things to need a surgeon for. You don't know what to say to that. You should get shoes, she says. I know. No, I mean. She looks at your feet, at the bandage, at the general situation. Not because of manners, I mean because you'll be back here, and the next time might be the time they talk about the ankle. She says it kindly, not as a threat, as one person telling another person a thing they need to know. You nod. She nods. That's the whole conversation. You stand up. Your foot aches, but it aches with the sharp, specific ache of a clean wound, not the deep throb of a festering one. You walk back out through the surgery gate into the November street. Here's the arithmetic of shoes in 1852. A pair of basic working shoes, leather, plain, functional, cost somewhere between 3 and 5 shillings from a cobbler. Second-hand shoes from a market stall can go for 1 shilling and 6pence, maybe less if they're badly worn. You earn 5 shillings a week at the match factory. Your expenses, 3pence a night for the shelf, which is 1 shilling and 9pence a week. Food, which if you eat carefully runs to maybe 2 shillings and 6pence. Account for 4 shillings and 3pence of that 5 shillings. Every week, that leaves 9pence. 9pence a week if you save all of it. A pair of shoes at the cheap end costs 18pence. 2 weeks of saving 9pence with no unexpected costs. But Agatha's 4 pennies, that comes out of this week. The lost wages for the morning at the hospital, that comes out of this week. And last week there was the fee to get your coat mended at the tailor on Bermondsey Street because the left shoulder had come apart at the seam, and without the coat the cold was going to kill you before the infection could. The money doesn't add up. Not because you're bad at arithmetic. You're quite good at arithmetic, actually. You were the best at sums in the schoolroom in Skibbereen, and your schoolmaster told your mother you had a head for numbers before the famine ended the school, and the schoolmaster went to Galway and things became what they became. The money doesn't add up because it's been designed, not intentionally, not by any single person, but by the accumulated arrangements of a society, to not add up. The wages for a 14-year-old factory hand and the cost of survival in a city like London balance at approximately nothing left over, so that the main activity of existence is management, moving money from one side of the equation to the other, keeping it at nothing rather than letting it go negative. Shoes are a luxury, not in the way that silk is a luxury, not the luxury of things you don't need, the luxury of things you can't afford even when you need them. The children on the step near Tanner Street, the ones you passed this morning, their parents know they need shoes. Their parents are not simply unaware of shoes as a concept. They're doing arithmetic every day, and shoes are on the wrong side of it. The mudlarks in the Thames mud, the crossing sweeper with his frozen red hands. Same arithmetic. One of the things London teaches you, if you're paying attention, is the specific machinery of poverty, not the fact of it. You knew the fact of it in Skibbereen, knew it thoroughly and personally, but the machinery, the way it works, the way it reproduces itself through small, reasonable-seeming decisions and unavoidable costs that accumulate until you are exactly where you are. 14, barefoot, sitting on a hospital bench doing sums that don't work out. You buy a pie from a stall near a London bridge on your way back. It costs a penny. It has some kind of meat in it, and a crust that is harder than it looks, but it's warm, and you eat it standing on the bridge, watching the river. The Thames below is full of boats. It's always full of boats. The river is the city's artery. You can feel the city's pulse in it. Coal barges moving downriver. A passenger steamer leaving a trail of black smoke. Wherries crossing back and forth. Somewhere upriver, barely visible through the industrial haze, the dome of St. Paul's rising above the roofline. You eat your pie and watch the boats and let yourself feel, for a moment, the specific thing about this city that you've never managed to put into words even inside your own head. It's too big for you and you're inside it anyway. Both things are true at the same time. It exceeds you by an almost infinite amount, and yet here you are, existing in it, making change at the factory, knowing which streets to avoid at night, knowing what crossing sweepers charge and how much a shelf at the lodging house costs and which surgeon at Guy's Hospital is good. You're becoming somebody who knows London. 11 months and 9 days, maybe 12 days now. You've lost count of the exact number for the first time since you started counting. You finish your pie. You throw the paper in the gutter. Everyone throws things in the gutter. The gutter is London's answer to the question of where things go, and you watch it settle into the general matter of the street. You walk back to Bermondsey without hurrying. That night you unwrap your foot under the candle. The red circle is smaller. You press the surrounding skin carefully, the way the dresser did, moving outward from the cut. The tenderness is less, not gone, but less. The darkened centre has a crust now, the kind of crust that means your body is doing its work. You wrap it again. You lie down. The lodge house is cold and dark and smells of all the things it always smells of. The red-faced man's cough has worsened. He's been coughing since before you arrived tonight, and he's still coughing now, a steady percussion that marks time in the dark. You think about tetanus, about gas gangrene, about the names Pemberton didn't say but was clearly thinking about. Here's what you now understand that you didn't understand 3 weeks ago when your shoes disappeared. The city is not neutral. The street is not a neutral surface. Every step you take through it is an interaction between the soft biology of your foot and the accumulated chemistry and microbiology of everything the city has deposited there. You've been lucky. The infection has stayed below the ankle. The surgeon cleaned it in time. You're going to be fine probably if you come back in 2 days and if it continues to improve, but luck is not a system. Luck runs out. And 3 weeks of walking barefoot through Bermondsey streets is 3 weeks of testing luck against odds that are not good. Somewhere in London tonight someone is lying in a hospital bed with a leg that was too long in turning red. Someone who did not have an Agatha, or could not take the morning off, or lived further from Guy's Hospital, or had their infection in a different spot or on a different day. These people are not failures. They're not unlucky in some grand cosmic sense. They're people for whom the arithmetic of poverty intersected with the microbiology of London streets in the particular way that these things intersect when they're going to end badly. The church bell somewhere outside strikes 9. Somewhere closer, the red-faced man coughs and coughs and coughs. You close your eyes. The foot hurts, but it hurts cleanly now. Tomorrow is a work day. 2 days later, you're back at Guy's Hospital. Pemberton looks at the foot for less time than before. The red circle is visibly smaller. The crust is forming properly. The cut is beginning to close. He redresses it with clean lint and carbolic. Better, he says. Yes, sir. Another week of this dressing and it should be healing well. Keep it as dry as you can, he pauses, and off the bare cobblestones if possible. I'm trying to save for shoes, sir. He looks at you, not unkindly. The look of a man who has heard this exact sentence many times. He doesn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Come with me for a minute." You're surprised enough that you follow him without asking why. He takes you down a corridor deeper into the hospital to a ward with a row of cots. The ward smells strongly of carbolic, and underneath the carbolic something else. Something that triggers the same primitive alarm as your infected foot did, but more insistent. There are 8 people in the cots. Most of them are asleep or unconscious. A few are awake, lying very still with the specific stillness of people who have been through something exhausting. "Look at them," Pemberton says, not cruelly, as an instruction. You look. The people in the cots are thin. That's the first thing. The kind of thin that happens fast, not over months. The thin of sudden water loss. Their faces have a hollowness around the eyes. 2 of them have a colour to their skin that is wrong, slightly blue-grey. "Cholera," Pemberton says. "You've heard of cholera. Everyone in London has heard of cholera. There was an outbreak in 1849. You know this because your aunt mentioned it in her letter, the one that said London was work if you were willing. And they said 14,000 people died in London in that year. These 8, Pemberton says, came in from a single court off Tooley Street, a small court, 12 families, 1 water pump." He looks at you to see if you're following. "The water pump, you say?" "The water pump," he nods. "There's a physician, Dr. Snow, John Snow, who has been arguing for several years that cholera spreads through contaminated water, that when a cesspit leaches into a water supply, what comes out of the pump is not clean water. He's been collecting evidence, data. He showed in 1849 that deaths from cholera clustered around specific water sources. He's telling you this carefully, the way he would tell a person who is capable of understanding it. Most of my colleagues do not accept his theory. They believe cholera spreads through the air, miasma, bad air from the filth of the streets and the river." He looks at the people in the cots. "I'm not certain Snow is entirely right, but I'm not certain he's wrong. And what I know is this. The closer a person lives to the street, literally, physically close, in a basement, barefoot, hands in the gutter, the more likely they are to be in that bed." He turns back to the corridor. "The water that pumps up from the wells in Bermondsey and Southwark comes from aquifers that the Thames feeds, and the Thames receives everything, the drains from the privies, the runoff from the slaughterhouses, the contents of the cesspits when they overflow, which in a wet November is often." He pauses. "The street matter you walk through barefoot, some of it finds its way to the water table eventually. You think about the basin in the lodging house, the slightly brown water. When you walk through the street without shoes," Pemberton says, "you put your skin in direct contact with matter that contains, among other things, the agent of cholera. Whether that agent is in the water or in the air or, as I suspect, in something we don't yet have a good name for, the proximity matters, the contact matters." He looks at you. "The shoes are not a vanity," he says. "They're a barrier between your biology and the cities." He leaves you standing in the corridor outside the cholera ward. You walk back through Borough slowly, thinking about what Pemberton said. The streets don't look different. They look exactly as they always look. Busy and loud and grey and full of the accumulated matter of too many people in too small a space. But you're seeing them differently. You're seeing them as a system. Not chaos, but a system with inputs and outputs. The city produces waste. The waste goes into the street, into the drains, into the river. The river feeds the water table. The water table feeds the pumps. The pumps feed the people, and the people produce more waste, which goes back into the street. It's a closed loop, except it doesn't close cleanly. It festers. And the people who are most exposed to the festering are the ones at the bottom of every other loop in the city. The ones who can't afford clean water delivered to the house, who use the shared pump in the court. The ones who can't afford shoes, who walk through the street matter in bare feet. The ones who live in the basement, the lowest floor where the street matter percolates through the walls when it rains. The geography of disease in London in 1852 is also the geography of poverty. They map onto each other almost perfectly. You know this street. You've walked it 100 times, but you've been walking it as someone trying not to be poor, trying to manage the arithmetic, trying to keep the numbers at 0 rather than negative. You haven't been walking it as someone thinking about what's underfoot. The crossing sweeper at the main road junction, different boy today, slightly older, the same coat too large uniform, sweeps his path without looking up. You give him a penny. He nods once, brisk and professional. You walk across his clean strip of cobblestone. On the other side, you stop. The street ahead is not swept. It's the standard Bermondsey street, packed and dark and wet from last night's rain, steaming slightly where the winter sun has been hitting it. The standard river of everything. You look at it. You look at the specific texture of it near the gutter, where it's deepest. The dark layered matter that accumulates over hours and days and weeks until it becomes the ground itself, more organic than mineral, more city than stone. You've been walking through this. For 3 weeks you've been walking through this in thin stockings and bare feet. And before the 3 weeks, before the shoes disappeared, you were still walking through it. The shoes were just a barrier. They weren't immunity. Every step you took in those shoes, the leather sole was in contact with this. The difference was the barrier held. You start walking again, carefully, watching. The shoemaker's shop is on Bermondsey Street, 3 minutes from the match factory. You've walked past it every day for 11 months. A small shop front with 3 pairs of boots in the window and the smell of leather and wax that pushes through the half-open door even in cold weather. You've walked past it 100 times without going in. Today, you go in. The shoemaker is a man of about 50, small and precise-looking, wearing a leather apron and steel-rimmed spectacles. He looks up when you come through the door. He looks at your feet. "Working boots," he says. "How much?" He looks you over with the professional detachment of a person who has spent a career measuring humans against materials. Basic working boot. Plain leather, single sole, 3 shillings. That's without any fitting adjustment. 3 shillings. 6 weeks of saving 9 pence if nothing else happened. "Do you have anything second-hand?" He nods at a basket near the door. You've never noticed the basket before. It's full of shoes. Old shoes. The kind that have been resoled or repaired and still haven't found a buyer. You crouch down and go through them. Most are wrong. Too small, too large, too destroyed to be worth it. But near the bottom of the basket, under a pair of women's boots, there's a pair of working shoes that might work. Heavy leather. The right sort of heavy. One has a small crack in the sole near the toe, but the other is solid. "How much for these?" The shoemaker looks at them. 9 pence for the pair. The crack won't let in much if you don't go in the wet. 9 pence. Exactly what you save in a week, when you save anything at all. You look at the shoes. You look at the bandage on your foot. You look at Agatha's remaining 2 pennies in your hand. I haven't got ninepence today, you say. I've got tuppence. Could I leave tuppence and pay the rest on Saturday when I get my wages? The shoemaker looks at you for a long moment. This is not an unusual request in Bermondsey in 1852. He's heard versions of this request many times. Saturday, he says, not a question. An agreement and a deadline in one word. Saturday. Absolutely. He takes the tuppence and hands you the shoes. Not the transaction of a trusting man. The transaction of a man who has calculated the odds and decided tuppence in hand and 7pence on Saturday is better than nothing. You put the shoes on in the shop, they're too wide in the heel and they smell of someone else's feet, and the crack in the left sole will be a problem in wet weather. They are not beautiful. They are not comfortable. They are shoes, the soles between your feet and the street. Walking back to the factory in shoes is different, not immediately better in any meaningful way. The shoes are stiff and the heel is loose, and they'll blister your ankle by Thursday if you're not careful. But different in the specific way that barriers are different from no barriers. You can't feel the temperature of the cobblestones anymore. This seems like a small thing. It isn't. For 3 weeks your feet have been the city's thermometer and texture map and hazard sensor. You've been reading the street through the soles of your feet involuntarily, constantly, your nervous system running a continuous assessment of what's underfoot. Cold here, slick here, something sharp, avoid it, something soft, definitely avoid it. In shoes, this goes quiet. It's like the city has turned down slightly, gone from full volume to something more manageable. You think about the children you saw this morning outside the lodging house, the girl with the bread and the flat observational eyes. She's never had shoes, probably. The street has always been at full volume for her. She's spent her entire conscious life reading it through her feet. Or maybe that's not quite right either. Maybe after enough time the reading becomes automatic, becomes part of you. The city's feedback just becomes background noise. You don't know. You've only been barefoot for 3 weeks. She's been barefoot for 7 years. You reach the factory gate at 1:20. The foreman marks you in and says nothing about the morning. You take your seat. You dip and lay. Agatha looks at your feet. She doesn't say anything. She goes back to her work, but she nods. Once, brief, satisfied. The nod of a woman who gave 4 pennies and considers them well spent. The foot heals, not quickly and not without setbacks. Twice in the following week the dressing slips and the cut reopens and you have to go back to the surgery gate and have it redressed. Pemberton sees you both times. The second time, he examines the jaw again. You should consider a different line of work, he says. He says it without drama, like a man noting the weather. You don't say anything because what would you say? The phosphorus in match manufacturing causes progressive bone necrosis, he says, in young people especially. The jaw is most vulnerable, painless at first. The symptoms don't appear for months or years. By the time they're obvious, the damage is extensive. He redresses the foot and sends you back to the factory. You think about what he said. You think about Mary Fagan's swelling. You think about the sweet chemical yellow smell of phosphorus that you've stopped noticing. You think about the arithmetic of alternatives. What work in London is available to a 14-year-old Irish immigrant boy who can read and do sums and carry things and not complain out loud? You know the answer because you've been learning it for 11 months. The options are real, but they're narrow. Dock labour if you can get on the list. Running errands for shops if a shop will hire you. The leather dresses and the tanneries which will do for your hands what the match factory's doing for your jaw. Or the match factory, which is what you have. You keep going to the match factory, but you start asking around. December in London. The fog comes in from the river and doesn't leave. Not a mist, not a haze. A fog that sits on the city like a physical thing, yellow-grey and thick, that narrows the street to 30 feet of visibility and makes every gas lamp a smeared glow. The famous London fog. You've heard about it before you came. What nobody told you is that it's not water vapour. Not exactly. It's coal smoke and water vapour together. The burning coal from a million fires meets the river damp, and they combine into something with its own quality. The colour of old paper, the smell of sulphur, the taste of metal. You breathe it all day. You breathe it at night. Your handkerchief, which you wash when you can, is grey within a day of washing. The whites of your eyes are slightly red from November through March. The streets are dark by 3 in the afternoon. The gas lamps do what they can. The link boys do their business. You've used them twice since coming to London, and both times the sixpence felt worth it. On the worst fog nights, navigation is more or less memory. You walk home by the feel of the route under your feet. The shoes matter here too. The fog condenses on cold surfaces and runs off into the streets, adding to the wet layer that is always present. Walking barefoot in December fog is a cold that travels upward through the soles and settles in the ankles and knees and doesn't leave until spring. You're still wearing the second-hand shoes. The crack in the left sole has gotten worse. There's a moment in every wet day when water gets in, and your left foot starts the shift towards soggy and stays there. You've tried stuffing newspaper in the toe area to absorb it. You've tried running mutton fat along the crack to seal it. Neither works for long. Saturday wages. The shoemaker on Bermondsey Street. You saved the 7 pence and paid it. Now you owe a separate debt to yourself. Proper shoes, eventually. From the saving of what doesn't get spent on other things. The other things always come. Red-faced man from the bunk opposite turned out to have tuberculosis. He's gone. Not dead, just gone. One morning his bunk was empty and the shelf had new bedding on it. The woman who replaced him, a Welsh woman working in a hat factory, is quieter and doesn't cough, which is an improvement. On a Sunday in mid-December, you go to Mass at the Catholic Church on Dockhead Street. It's the first time you've been since arriving in London. Your aunt found you the church in her last letter, gave you the address, told you to go even if you didn't feel like it. You don't feel like it. But you go. The church is small and cold and full of Irish people. Not all Irish. There are Italian dock workers and some Polish men who work at the tannery, but mostly Irish. Mostly from the southwest. Cork, Kerry, Clare. The accents of home, which you haven't heard in 11 months, hit you somewhere in the chest that you weren't expecting. The priest is from Mayo. He speaks English because it's a London church, but he slips into Irish at the end of the sermon. Just a sentence, a benediction, and the sentence opens something in you that has been closed since November of last year, and the something that opens is not entirely manageable. You manage it. You've learned that much at least. But walking back to the lodging house through the December fog, the city sounds muffled and soft around you. The gas lamp smeared and distant. Your shoes solid on the cold cobblestones. You feel it for the first time. Really feel it. The weight of the distance. The distance from Skibbereen. The specific distance of what's been left behind and what's been brought here instead. Your father's coat, the arithmetic in your head, the way you read the street under your feet. This is what you brought. January is cold and February is colder and March is cold, with occasional brief reminders that the sun exists. And then April comes. London in April is a different thing. Not immediately. The first week of April is indistinguishable from late March, grey, cold, wet. But sometime in the second week, something shifts. A morning where the light is a different quality. The grey is thinner, and under it some hint of blue. The streets don't change. The horse. Dung is still there. The runoff from the tanneries is still there. The broken glass and the nails and the accumulated matter of 2.5 million people are all still there. Nothing about the street is different in April, but everything about being in the street is different. You've survived the winter, the foot healed. You still have your jaw. You're still on the shelf at Tanner Street. You're still dipping and laying at the factory. You have 12 shillings saved. This is the largest amount of money you've ever had in your life as a London resident. 12 shillings. The shoemaker on Bermondsey Street has a pair of proper working boots in the window. Heavy leather, double sole, ankle height. The kind that will last 2 or 3 years with proper care. They cost 4 shillings. You buy them on a Saturday afternoon in April. The shoemaker laces them up for you without saying anything. He adjusts the left one because your left foot is slightly larger. He takes 3 minutes doing this. Careful and professional, the work of a person who has spent a career ensuring that feet are properly housed. You walk out of the shop in boots. The difference is physical. The sole is thick enough that you feel almost none of the cobblestones. The ankle support changes your gait. You walk upright, properly upright, instead of the compensating crouch you've developed over months of watching the ground. You walk the long way back to Tanner Street, past the factory, past the hospital gate, over the bridge, up and along the north bank briefly, just to see the river from a different angle. Past St. Saviour's Church where the bells ring on the hour, back south, back over the bridge, back along the Bermondsey streets, 2 miles in boots. It's ridiculous how good it feels. It's ridiculous that this is the best thing that has happened to you in several months. Boots, thick soles, your feet separated from the street by 4 shillings worth of leather and craft. But it is the best thing that has happened. In June, there's a man who comes to speak at the Mechanics Institute on Tooley Street. 6pence to get in, which you can afford now more or less. A few men from the factory are going. You go with them. The man is Dr. John Snow. He's a physician, a serious-looking man in his late 30s with a careful way of speaking that suggests someone who has thought very hard about every word before saying it. He has a map. The map is of Soho, north of the river. It shows the streets and the houses, and on the map there are black marks, clusters of marks. Each mark represents a death from cholera in the outbreak of 1849. The marks cluster around specific points, specifically around one point, the water pump on Broad Street. This is not coincidence, Snow says. The distribution of deaths corresponds to the distribution of people who used this pump. Families who lived closer to the pump died at higher rates. A family on the far edge of the district who used a different pump was not affected. He shows more data. Comparisons between water companies. The company that drew its water from a section of the Thames above the main London sewage outflow had lower cholera rates than the company drawing from below it. The disease is in the water, he says, not in the air. The miasma theory is wrong, and the mechanism by which it spreads is the contamination of drinking water by sewage. He pauses. The room is quiet. The cesspits of London overflow into the soil. The soil feeds the water table feeds the pumps, and the pumps feed the people. You think about Pemberton. about the ward with the 8 people from Tooley Street. The solution is simple in theory and enormously difficult in practice, Snow continues. London's sewage system must be separated from its water supply. The two cannot share the same underground geography. The river cannot both receive the city's waste and supply the city's water. Someone in the audience asks about the street cleaning, about the dung and the runoff. The street is part of the problem, Snow agrees. Every rain event washes the street matter into the drains, and the drains lead to the river, and the river leads eventually back to the pumps. The person who walks barefoot through the street of Bermondsey and has a cut on their foot is not just risking the infection of that cut. They are one point in a larger system of contamination that kills thousands. He says it without accusation, as a fact of epidemiology. But you feel it the way a fact feels when it lands on personal experience. You were one point in the system, the cut on your foot, the street matter, the drill down of Pemberton's arithmetic, the 8 people on cots in the guy's ward. You're not separate from the city's infrastructure. You are the city's infrastructure. You and the crossing sweeper and the mudlarks and the children on the step. The living machinery that keeps the wheels turning and takes the damage that wheels distribute. You listen to Snow until the end. You walk home in your 4-shilling boots on the clean-dish Bermondsey streets, the gas lamps orange in the June evening, and you think about systems. A year. 1 year and some months since you arrived on the coal barge from Cork, wearing your father's too big coat and carrying everything in a bundle of oilskin. The count has restarted. You've lost track of the exact number of days. This happened gradually, the exact count dissolving into the approximate. A year, about a year, more than a year. The way things dissolve when they stop being measurements of survival and start being just time passing. You're still at the match factory. You're still on the shelf at Tanner Street, though you've moved from the communal sleeping room to a slightly better arrangement. One of the small rooms upstairs, shared with one other person, a young man from Galway named Declan who is quiet and clean and doesn't snore. It costs a penny more a night. It's worth it. Agatha's swelling has gotten worse. She hasn't said anything about it, and you haven't asked. But she tilts her head a certain way now when she's thinking, tilts it away from the side where the swelling is, and you've started to understand what that means. What Pemberton meant when he said you should consider a different line of work. You've been considering. There's a position at a printing press on Borough High Street. An apprentice is positioned properly, with a printer who does newspapers and pamphlets and the kind of short-run illustrated material that sells at the markets. You heard about it through a man at the Mechanics' Institute. You applied. You showed the printer you could read and do arithmetic and follow instructions precisely. He hasn't given you an answer yet. He said next week. In the meantime, you dip and lay. The boots are holding up well. The double sole is still solid. You've been oiling them once a month with fat from the kitchen at the lodging house. They fit better now, shaped slightly to your foot. You walk to work every morning and back every evening, and you read the street not with your feet anymore, but with your eyes. You see the crossing sweeper at the main road junction. It's the same boy, has been for months. He knows your face now and nods when you pass. You see the children on the step in the mornings, sometimes the girl with the flat observational eyes, sometimes different children. The street is still the street. It hasn't changed. The horse dung is still there, the runoff from the tanneries, the coal ash in the gutter, the accumulated matter. But you walk through it now with 4 shillings of leather between you and it. On a Tuesday in October, a Tuesday that's nobody's anniversary, nobody's significant day, you go back to Guy's hospital, not because you're sick, not because anything is wrong. You go because you've been thinking about Pemberton and the cholera ward and the things he said, and you want to thank him, which is a stupid reason to go to a hospital, but you go anyway. The surgery gate, the man with the ledger. I was a patient here. I wanted to speak with Mr. Pemberton, if it's possible. The ledger man looks at you with the expression of someone who's not been asked this before. I'll check. Pemberton comes to the gate himself, which surprises you. He looks you over quickly. Automatic professional assessment. You're standing straight, both feet on the ground, coat has been repaired at the shoulder, colour is reasonable, jaw is intact. Reardon, he says, I wanted to thank you, sir. He waits. I've been thinking about what you told me, about the system, the water and the street and the proximity to the filth of the city, and about Dr. Snow's lecture. You pause. I think I understand now what you were trying to tell me that day, about the shoes not being a vanity. He looks at you with the look of a man reassessing a person he had partially written off as a statistic. I've applied for a position at a printing press, you say. On Borough High Street, away from the phosphorus. Good, he says. I wanted to tell you, because you told me to think about it, and I thought about it. He's quiet for a moment. How's the foot? Completely healed, 6 months now, he nods. The shoes? Good leather, double sole. You almost smile. I oil them once a month. He does something then that you don't expect. He extends his hand. You shake it, slightly stunned. A surgeon, at the surgery gate, shaking the hand of an Irish factory apprentice. If the printing doesn't work out, he says, come back. There are always positions for dressers who are clean and precise and not afraid of blood. He goes back inside. The ledger man is already writing something. You walk back to Bermondsey. The printer says yes on a Friday morning. The answer comes in a letter, which is delivered to the lodging house on Thursday evening, and which Declan holds out to you when you come in from the factory, without comment but with an expression that means he knows what the letter is. You open it standing up, coat still on. Dear Mr. Reardon, I am pleased to offer you the position of apprentice compositor at the rates discussed. Please present yourself on Monday next at 7 o'clock in the morning. Yours, W. Gillam. You stand there reading it twice. Your last day at the match factory is the following Friday. You say goodbye to Agatha on a Thursday, because you know Agatha will not want a fuss, and a Thursday goodbye is easier to manage than a Friday one. She's at her bench when you find her. Same position she's been in for 3 years. Dip and lay, dip and lay. She looks at you properly, taking a moment from the work. Printing press, you say. She nods once. The same nod as when you showed her the shoes. The phosphorus, she says. Yes. Good. She goes back to her work. Then without turning round. Keep your feet covered. The printing trade's got its own hazards, and most of them don't smell like match heads, which is both better and worse. You stand there for a moment. You want to say something about the 4 pennies, about the morning she sent you to the hospital, about the specific fact that her decision to press you that morning not to accept fine at face value might have kept you from losing a foot or worse. But Agatha is not a woman who wants things said. She's a woman who wants things done. I'll keep my feet covered, you say. You go back to your bench for the last time. On Sunday, the day before you start at the printing press, you walk up to the top of Bermondsey. Not that there's much of a top to Bermondsey. It's a flat district, essentially flat, which is part of why it floods. But there's a point on the high street near the church where the street rises slightly over an old feature in the ground, an old ridge maybe, or the edge of a buried stream. And from that point on a clear day you can see over the rooftops. Rooftops and chimneys, a forest of chimneys. The smoke from all of them rising and spreading and merging into the London sky, which is its own specific colour that exists nowhere else. The blue-grey-brown of coal and river and 400 years of industrial expansion. The river between the rooftops just barely visible. A strip of grey-green. And on the north bank, the dome of St. Paul's. You can always find St. Paul's. It's the fixed point. The thing that doesn't move. Whatever the weather, whatever the fog, when you can see anything beyond the immediate street, you can usually see the dome, there at the centre of a city that grew in circles outward from the old Roman fort, from the medieval market, from the bridge. You stand there for longer than you meant to. A woman with a basket passes and nods. A dog trots past with the specific, purposeful trot of a dog that knows where it's going. You think about the boot prints you're leaving on this street, the impression of 4-shilling double-soled leather in the damp of the October cobblestones. Shallow impressions, nothing that will last. By noon they'll be covered by the tracks of everyone else who passes. But for now, for this specific October Sunday morning, they're there. You look at the dome of St. Paul's. You look at the smoke from the chimneys. You look at the river, just barely between the rooftops. You came here with nothing except what you could carry. You leave this part of your London, this 11-month, almost a year part, with more than you came with. You know the streets. You know the prices and the routes and the faces of the people at the intersections. You know which crossing sweeper is which and what it costs to stay on the clean path. You know what's in the street. You know what it costs to walk through it without the right barrier. You know that the right barrier is not a luxury, is not about appearance or social standing or what other people think when they see your feet. The right barrier is the difference between your biology and the city's, and the city doesn't care about you. Not specifically, not personally. The city is a system. It produces and deposits and runs and accumulates, and it doesn't notice whether you're inside it or outside it, or whether you survive your passage through it. But you care, and you're learning. This is what London teaches, if you stay long enough and pay attention. Not greatness, not the dramatic lessons of the lecture hall or the execution grounds or the elevated views they write about in the newspapers. The small lessons, the specific ones. The lesson of the cut on the foot and the red circle spreading and the cost of the right shoes and the arithmetic that has to work out. You're here. You're going to the printing press tomorrow. You turn away from the view and walk home. The match factory closes for what it's worth in 1901, when Parliament finally restricts the use of white phosphorus in match manufacturing. The law comes after decades of campaign by women factory workers and union organisers who document case after case of phossy jaw in the industry. Mary Fagan, or someone like Mary Fagan, there were thousands of them, never gets compensated. Nobody who had phossy jaw in 1852 gets compensated. Most of them die of it before anyone decides to care systematically. John Snow's work on cholera water transmission is largely dismissed by the medical establishment during his lifetime. He dies in 1858, 6 years after the lecture at the Mechanics' Institute, before the theory is fully accepted. He is correct, as it turns out. He was always correct. The great stink of 1858 changes London. The summer is so hot and the river so foul that Parliament cannot function in its own building on the Thames River bank. The smell forces action that decades of public health campaigning couldn't manage. Joseph Bazalgette designs a sewer system that reroutes London's waste away from the drinking water supply, and the system is built in the 1860s. Cholera deaths in London drop dramatically and keep dropping. Because Snow was right. The crossing sweepers, the mudlarks, the children on the steps, they keep going for decades. The city's poverty doesn't resolve cleanly. The children's children are barefoot in streets somewhat cleaner than their grandparents. The children's children's children go to school sometimes. The streets improve slowly as wealth accumulates at every level of the system, and as the progressive wing of Victorian society makes the case, again and again, that the people at the bottom of the street cleaning economy are still people. The boots you bought last more or less as advertised. 3 years with proper care, then another pair, slightly better, from wages slightly higher, and then another. You learn to set type at the printing press. You learn the cases, the uppercase and the lowercase, the specific muscle memory of reaching for letters in the dark. Compositors' hands are different from factory hands. The calluses are in different places, more precise. The index finger and thumb of both hands hardened in specific points from handling the type. You print things, pamphlets, 2-penny newspapers, a single edition of a broadsheet reporting on the Great Exhibition at Crystal Palace in 1851, which you print in 1852 from reprinted copy because the demand never quite stopped. You move from the shelf at Tanner Street eventually. You rent a room, a whole room, in a house in Southwark, with a window that looks out onto a yard. You have a bed to yourself and a small table, and a hook on the door for your coat. This is not a great London success story. You don't become wealthy. You don't attend the opera or buy shares at the Royal Exchange. You don't become one of the men in silk coats discussing cargo prices. You become a working Londoner, a man who knows the city and lives in it, and reads it through his eyes instead of through the soles of his feet, mostly because he has good boots. On very cold nights, sometimes you can still feel the cobblestones through them. The memory is physical. It lives in the bottom of your feet. The cold of November 1851, the first morning you stepped out of the lodging-house gate barefoot. The specific temperature of that specific street. You carry it. The room in Southwark, October, maybe 1855 or 1856, 3 or 4 years after the shelf at Tanner Street. The window shows you a square of London sky that is darkening now, 4 o'clock, and the light going, the way it always goes in October. A candle on the table, a printed pamphlet you're reading before the light goes entirely. You've developed a habit of reading everything you can get your hands on, partly because you're a compositor now and the text passes through your hands, and partly because you grew up in a house where reading was the thing your schoolmaster said you were good at and you're trying to honour that. The pamphlet is about sanitation, about Bazalgette's proposed sewers. You read about the plans for the new underground system, and you think about Pemberton and Snow, and the 8 people in the cholera ward, and the way the water from the Bermondsey pump tasted slightly of something you could never identify. You set the pamphlet down. Your boots are by the door, as they are every evening. You've started taking them off when you come in, which is something you never did on the shelf at Tanner Street, didn't have the space for the gesture. Here they go by the door. You clean them on Sundays. You oil them once a month. They're on their second resole now. The leather uppers are good. The soles will go again in a year, maybe, and then you'll have them resoled again. You figured out the economics of it. 1 pair of good boots maintained properly over 5 years cost less than 3 or 4 pairs of cheap ones replaced when they fall apart. This is the kind of arithmetic that lives in you now. Not just money, but everything. The arithmetic of small decisions made correctly versus correctly seeming decisions that cost you more later. The candle throws the room into orange warmth. Outside the window, the sky goes from grey to dark grey to the particular dark of a London night that is never quite fully dark because of the gas lamps reflected off the clouds and the coal smoke. The city sounds drift in. Carts on the road, a voice calling something, the distant church bell striking the quarter hour. You're tired. Not the bone tired of factory work, the chemical exhausted tired that has no bottom to it. The ordinary tired of a day of physical and mental work, the tired that sleep is designed to address. You think about the barefoot boy walking along Tanner Street 3 years ago, watching the ground, feeling the cold, carrying his father's too big coat and his arithmetic and the particular shape of 11 months of London survival in his body. He didn't know what he was walking through. He knew it was dirty. He knew it was cold. He didn't know about the Clostridium tetani or the cholera or the mathematics of infection probability or the underground aquifer that connected his lodging house pump to the Thames outflow. He found out. Finding out is most of what the city offers you, if you're paying attention. Not answers, not the clean resolution of problems. Finding out. Layer by layer, year by year. Each layer revealing a layer underneath it that you didn't know was there. The city doesn't get simple. London never gets simple. It gets more legible, which is different. You can read more of it now. The streets make more sense. The systems behind the systems are more visible, but it doesn't simplify. It doesn't become manageable in any final way. It just becomes yours, in the way that difficult things become yours when you've spent enough time with them. This is your city. The lodging house on Tanner Street, the cutting crossing at the main road, Agatha at her bench, Pemberton at the surgery gate, the crossing sweeper and his 3-foot wide London, the mudlarks in the Thames, mud at low tide. Your boots by the door, you blow out the candle. The room goes dark. The city comes through the window as sound without light. The last carts of the evening, the church bell somewhere striking the hour. You lie down. Your father's coat is on the hook by the door. 12 years he wore it before he gave it to you. It fits you now. You've grown into it over the past 3 years, the way you've grown into the city slowly and without noticing until one day you're wearing it, and it isn't too big anymore. He would be pleased, probably, that you're here and intact, that you made it past the 1st November, and the cut on the foot and the match factory and everything else the city offered as a test. You think he'd be pleased about the books, the reading, the printing press and the type cases and the ink-stained hands. He liked reading. There weren't many books in Skibbereen, but the ones there were, he read them. You close your eyes. The city keeps going. It always keeps going. There are people on every street right now doing the things that the night version of London requires. The crossing sweeper has gone home to wherever crossing sweepers go. The mudlarks have come up from the Thames mud. The link boys are out with their torches, navigating the dark for people who can afford to navigate in light. And in the Bermondsey streets, the streets you walked barefoot for 3 weeks that felt like a year, the streets that are still what they are, still full of horse dung and blood from the slaughterhouses and ash and chemical runoff and all the deposited matter of the city's daily metabolism. In those streets there are people tonight who have no shoes, children, adults, people for whom the arithmetic hasn't worked out yet, the way it didn't work out for you for a while. People walking carefully, reading the street through their feet, managing the hazard the way you managed it, hoping the luck holds. The luck doesn't always hold. This is the thing you carry. Not guilt exactly, not simple sorrow. Something more specific and more durable. The understanding that survival in a city like this is not simply a matter of being careful or being smart or working hard. It's the sum of hundreds of small contingencies, most of which you don't control. Agatha's 4 pennies, the surgeon being good at his job, the infection not spreading past the ankle, the shoes eventually because the arithmetic worked out eventually and it doesn't always. The people tonight in the Bermondsey streets barefoot, walking carefully, they are not separate from you. They're not a different kind of person. They're the same calculation, just at a different point in it. You learned this. London taught it. The hardest lesson, and maybe the most important. The October night comes down over the city. The church bells count their way through the hours and you don't hear them. You're asleep. Somewhere out there the coal smoke and the river fog are combining into the London sky, and the gas lamps are smeared halos in the murk, and the crossing sweepers' brooms are propped against the walls of their corners until morning, and in the lodging houses and the cellars and the streets of Bermondsey and Southwark, and every district of this city too large for any single person to comprehend, people are settling into whatever rest the night provides. The brief hours between the city's demands. The window between one day's labour and the next. You are one of them. One point in the system. One body in the city. But your boots are by the door. And that's not nothing. That has never been nothing. The sounds of the city soften. Not silence. London doesn't do silence, not in 1856, not ever really, but a turning down of the volume, the way fatigue turns down everything until the world is just the next breath and the weight of the blanket and the faint smell of October coming through the window. Let it come. Let the city keep its vigil without you for a few hours. Let the cobblestones be cold without your weight on them. Let the street do what streets do in the dark. Accumulate, settle, wait. Let the river run its grey-green way to the sea. Let your hands stop moving. Let the arithmetic in your head slow to silence. Let the day's numbers and negotiations and routes and exchanges dissolve into the formlessness they always approach, eventually. You've earned this. The city doesn't close. The city doesn't sleep. But you do. And somewhere underneath the October London night, under the cobblestones and the horse dung and the accumulated matter of 2.5 million lives, the water table runs quietly, carrying everything the city gives it, flowing toward the river flowing toward the sea, the same as yesterday, the same as the night before, the same as all the nights stretching back to whenever the city first began to be this thing, this enormous, impossible human accumulation on the banks of a river in the southeast of a small island. People have slept here through all of it, through the plague and the fire and the cholera and the fog, through bad winters and worse ones, through the long cold nights when the arithmetic doesn't work and the short summer nights when it almost does. You sleep here too, one person, one room, one October night, your boots by the door, the city going on without you for a few hours. That's enough. That's always been enough. Good night.